We fear the repercussions of what we say. We fear hurting the other person or things getting conflict ridden or uncomfortable. We fear it ending the relationship and all of the fears that come up with that. We doubt ourselves and the legitimacy of our own need and desire, right? So we can get caught in a loop of invalidating our own wish and need for something different that leads us to smush it down and repress it in service of maintaining the still water.
This is Let Love Begin, a podcast for the recovering brokenhearted, ready to heal and reclaim their enthusiasm. If you are facing the daunting decision of whether to salvage or let go of your relationship, then this is the episode for you. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Jernigan, Dr. Lindsay Jernigan, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and master therapist with expertise in emotional resilience, relationships and sexuality, personal evolution and team building. And I have to say that this is one of my most favorite episodes I've recorded to date. This is just such a powerful conversation, and Dr. Jernigan offers so much valuable advice that it couldn't be more spot on in my mind. So we're going to cover 3 questions you should ask yourself, a self-inquiry, before deciding to end a significant relationship. I think that this conversation is really important for anyone who is thinking of ending their relationship, or if you've ever been in the situation before where you've had to make these decisions and perhaps you made a hasty decision and didn't ask yourself these questions. Anyway, on to the episode. And again, as always, please be guided by your inner compass. If anything doesn't feel right for you, leave it and take what works for you. So I am super excited today to speak to a very special doctor. Welcome, Dr. Lindsay. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today, we're going to be talking about questions to ask yourself before deciding to end a relationship. Now, I think this is really important, especially if you've been with someone for a really long time. So I'm really excited to have you here today to talk about this.
Thank you so much.
And we're just going to jump right in. Let's go straight to it. Why do we stay longer than we should in a relationship?
Okay. So it's a great question. I want to answer in multi-parts. And so the first part is just to acknowledge that we're humans and change is hard. And we go into relationships with a lot of hopes and dreams and the expectation often of being together for a lifetime with the visions that are entwined in that hope. And so letting go of a relationship often comes with a lot of grief and a lot of loss. Our lives get entwined depending on how long we've been together. So there can be a lot of practical, familial, financial complication in letting go. And it hurts. And our culture stigmatizes pain. So often when we are approaching something that feels painful, we feel like, oh, that's a sign that it's the wrong choice. I've done something wrong. Something has gone wrong, and I shouldn't be feeling this way. So that can lead us to stay in the effort to avoid that painful experience, even though the pain may be what I'd call healthy pain. It may be pain we have to go through to get to the healthy change. So the stigmatizing of the pain is one part of it. And then there's a stigma issue beyond that too, which brings me to part 2 of the answer, which is particularly for women in relationships, our culture stigmatizes getting out of a relationship. Our culture stigmatizes being single as a woman, certainly stigmatizes divorce. And women are really enculturated and conditioned to be the ones who feel responsible for the wellness of the relationship, right? The connection care falls to the woman. And so women will often stay in a relationship because it feels like a failure if the connection doesn't work, if the relationship doesn't work. And then along with the grief and complications that they're facing on leaving the relationship, they also feel the cultural shame of the divorce or the separation or the single womanhood or whatever it is that they're facing next. There's even a third layer to that, which is we're also conditioned as women to be responsible for other people's comfort and happiness. And so if the ending of that relationship comes with not only pain for ourselves, but pain for somebody else, right? Pain for the partner, pain for our families, pain for children who may be involved, now it's extra hard for many women to let themselves leave the relationship because they come right up against all that conditioning that says it was your job to take care of this relationship and it was your job to take care of the feelings and comfort of everybody impacted by the relationship, right? So how dare you leave that on behalf of something like your own joy or satisfaction or your own intuition that this isn't right or your own discomfort in the relationship. So
Right.
that cultural pressure combined with the internal emotional pressure to avoid the pain can be very stymieing.
I'm just nodding in agreement and this smile on my face because everything you're saying is just so spot on. Women feel responsible and totally ashamed. And I've never really heard anyone say that pain is stigmatized, but gosh, that was such like a breakthrough moment for me. I remember I went through a really horrible breakup and at the time I pushed it away for years. And so it prolonged it. And I remember somebody close to me went through a breakup and I was like, feel it, just feel it. Go through it all, cry
Yes.
it out, feel all the pain now, because the longer you push it away, the longer it's going to linger.
Yes. So you just hit on one of my favorite points to explore with people when they're staying in a relationship to avoid a feeling, which is to actually look at how it doesn't work. All it does is prolong the feeling you're dreading feeling in the first place, right? So there's this adage that says that which we resist persists, or a less formal way of saying it is we create what we fear. And I just again and again with the clients who I sit with, I see this to be true. And I don't, and not just clients, I see it in my own life. I see it in my friends and family. It's just so human. We create the thing we fear. So, like you were just describing, you maybe stayed in a relationship because you were afraid of the pain of going through the ending or the goodbye, but that led you to stay in a relationship where you were feeling some version of pain, some dissatisfaction, some unhappiness, some loneliness that was leading you to want to leave it. But because you were avoiding the pain, you stayed in a relationship that then prolonged that feeling that you didn't want, right? Loneliness is another great example of this with relationships that often I hear people wanting to leave relationships because despite having a partner, the primary problem is they feel really lonely. But here's the thing that happens is people will be so afraid of the loneliness they anticipate or fear on the other side of a breakup that they stay in the relationship where they're feeling chronically lonely.
Hmm.
Right. So they've just done it again. They've just created the thing they fear because that which we resist persists.
Yeah, I think that's so much worse though, being in a relationship with someone and feeling lonely than being by yourself. Because when you're by yourself, you have full autonomy to do whatever you want to do. But when you're in a relationship, it's like you're trapped. That's how I feel.
Well, and alone and lonely are not the same thing. So
Right.
you're describing that you can be comfortable being alone,
Hmm.
but it's not comfortable to be partnered with somebody who you're presumably supposed to be able to get your connection needs met from, but feel lonely, right? Which means there's this one person who's authorized to meet your connection needs,
Hmm.
but those needs aren't being met. And now you're saying you'd experience that as being trapped and imprisoned. Well, now how are you going to get your connection needs met if you can't feel connected in the relationship? And that's really common. You are so not alone in that. That's a very common experience.
Yeah, and if you've made the decision with your partner to be monogamous, then you're like,
Right.
okay, well, we've decided that nobody else is going to play this role. So then, and so that's one of those tricky things, isn't it? Because we could easily be talking about sex here. I know this is a big one that one partner
Hmm.
wants more sex than the other, and it really can come a really huge point of contention in the relationship. And obviously, no one should do anything sexual that they don't want to do ever. But if you feel like your needs aren't getting met, then you've got two choices. Is this okay with you? You've decided that you're not going to be with anyone else. Or is it so important to you that it's not going to work for me to stay in this relationship? But obviously, it's much easier for me to just say it very clean cut versus the messy
Yeah.
emotions that come with doing it.
That's right. And we can think about what makes it harder than that in real life, right? That we fear the repercussions of what we say. We fear hurting the other person or things getting conflict ridden or uncomfortable. We fear it ending the relationship and all of the fears that come up with that. We doubt ourselves and the legitimacy of our own need and desire, right? So we can get caught in a loop of invalidating our own wish and need for something different that leads us to smush it down and repress it in service of maintaining the still water in the relationship. So we're starting to jump into what I think of as enmeshment patterns. Let's say I needed a different kind of connection from my partner, but I felt like, well, I can't ask for that without upsetting my partner, right? So whether we're talking about a sexual connection or an emotional connection, and therefore I'm going to doubt the legitimacy of what I need. I'm going to suppress that in order to keep the other person comfortable in service of maintaining the still waters of the connection because I believe that's my job, right? I've been conditioned to believe that's my job. Now we're in an enmeshed relationship where I can't feel XYZ because you, ABC, right? I tell my clients this enmeshed place is where this is where libido goes to die. This is where intimacy goes to die. It's the home of resentment. It's the home of loneliness. This is the ironic thing. We do this in the name of maintaining what we think of as intimacy or connection, but really we've just removed ourselves from the equation, right? If I'm not coming forward with my real needs and feelings, now there's not two people in the room anymore. And intimacy comes from there being two people in the room.
I think a lot of the times when people think about intimacy, they think about sex or physical connection. Can you talk a little bit about what intimacy is in this context?
Yeah, so I'm using the word intimacy to mean a deep sense of connection. So that could be knowing each other emotionally in a really honest way. It could mean a sense of a spiritual connection. It could be physical connection that is sexual or sensual or affectionate or playful, any form or comforting, any form of body connection, really. And sometimes intimacy even comes in the form of some cognitive connection, some intellectual sparkiness, some enjoyment of each other on that layer, right? I think in terms of body, mind, heart, and spirit, is there some form of connection and deep relating to each other on each of those levels? It's different for different couples. Not everybody craves connection on all four of those levels. And so then we get into looking at, is the match right?
Right.
Right? Does what I want in terms of intimacy match what my partner wants in terms of intimacy? And if not, are our different visions mutually exclusive and incompatible? Or can they be blended even though they differ?
Or can we learn?
Or can we learn?
Because
Yes.
I was thinking before when I said there's two choices, you can leave or you can stay. When after that, I was like, well, hang on, you could work on it. And the reason why,
Mhm.
I guess the reason why I said that was because I'm thinking of a couple friend of mine, and one of them's really loves intimacy, sexual intimacy, and the other one doesn't. And it's interesting when I talk to her about it, I just don't think about it. It's just not on my radar. It's not something that I have to be prompted to think about it. It's that far out of my reality. And I was like, wow, I feel like I'm quite a sexual person. It's really important to me to have that connection with my partner. And I was
Mhm.
thinking, if I was with someone like her, would I be okay with that? And for me, it's yes, it can be learned, but the way she described it, I don't know if I could, because I'm like,
Yeah.
it's so important to me to feel connected to you that like I want it to be on your radar. And I think back to the best relationships I've had, we do have that commonality, and it doesn't have to always be sexual. It could just be like my partner putting his hand on my leg or touching my shoulder or something like that.
Well, one of the things I love about what you're saying is it's the reminder that there's no one right way to be in relationship, right? That worked for your friend and it wouldn't
Yeah.
have worked for you, and that's okay. So, like when we're trying to decide whether to stick with a relationship or not, it's really important to look inwards and not outwards. There's no rules or markers to be hit that make a relationship successful or not successful. The question is it working for you? So,
Mhm.
you were noticing that one wouldn't have worked for you unless there was room for growth. So let me go back to the enmeshment thing for a minute, because the other thing that happens when we get in that enmeshed place, let's say you had been in an intimate relationship with that friend of yours and you were starting to feel like, I can't be the sexual person I really am because she doesn't have as strong a libido as I do, or she doesn't desire this in our relationship as much as I do. And so I can't be me in relationship with her, right? I have to suppress this in order to protect the relationship. That would work for a little while, meaning you'd stay together. And then eventually this thing would bubble up for you where you would feel like I have to be myself. And the only way to be myself is to get out of the relationship. And so if we go from here to here, we call that an enmeshment estrangement cycle, where we go from I can't be me and be with you, and I can only be me if I'm without you, right? That's the enmeshment estrangement. And what you're very wisely bringing attention to, isn't there a third alternative, which is growing,
Right.
right? And the answer to that is yes. And so that third alternative is called differentiation, where we actually practice what happens if I do try being myself in the relationship. In my mind, that's what intimacy is. It's the ability to be all the way you in relationship with somebody who you're making room for and is choosing to also be all the way them. And it's not always comfortable.
In order to have that kind of relationship, to even have the conversation about, hey, I want to be fully me, I want you to be fully you, both partners would have to be committed to growth personally. Because if they're not committed to growth personally, there's going to be all kinds of walls, and one person's going to feel like they can't be honest because the other person's going to get upset.
And one person's going to feel attacked anytime they receive feedback. The image I've used for this is imagining like a game of leapfrog. And you don't always have to be growing at exactly the same pace. Like you don't have to be holding hands and walking side by side. It might be more of a leapfrogging personal growth process, but both people have to be in the game, right? Because if one person just keeps leaping and leaping and leaping, eventually there's too much space and the game can't go on. Both people end up feeling lonely from there.
In that scenario that you just described, I feel like if you are in that situation too long, you're almost betraying yourself. It's either you or me. I remember saying that years ago when I broke up with someone. I have to choose one of us. And I'm the only person who's with me all the time. So I have to choose me.
Exactly. I think that's why this enmeshment place is a place where resentment is so high and where libido goes to die, even, right? Because like our life force energy that has our creativity and our sensuality and our generosity and our curiosity, right? All of that fizzles if we're in that place where we feel like I can't be myself. In order to stay with you and keep you comfortable, I have to be betraying or abandoning myself. Now my life force energy is going to dim, right? And so if I feel like I've just lost my light because of you, oh, well, of course there's going to be resentment. And of course I'm not going to find that sexy. And of course I'm not going to be able to connect to my own sensual energy anymore if I felt like I had to turn my light down to keep you comfortable, right? But I think it's really important to name that sometimes we do that thinking our partner wants that from us, and sometimes they don't. So I don't mean to be saying this in a way that is all about blaming the invisible partner on the other side of these examples that I'm giving. Sometimes it's our own conditioning or our own relationship history, our own family history that has led us to be uncomfortable with conflict or has led us to feel like our worth is based on keeping other people comfortable or being pleasing to our partners in some way. And those patterns are actually the ones that are driving that dynamic, not a real request from the partner. That's why one of the things I always say to couples before they think about ending a significant relationship is, have you taken a look at yourself? Right? Have you looked at what your part of the dynamic is, which doesn't mean what in the struggle is your fault. I'm never looking for fault, but what's your pattern? A dynamic exists between multiple people, two or more people, right? What role do you play in that dynamic? Is your role one of retreat in the face of conflict? Is your role one of hotness or volatility in the face of conflict? If those are your patterns, what would it mean to explore that? Where does that come from? What purpose does it serve? What would an alternative look like? What would taking one baby step in the direction of doing your character differently, right? Your role in the dynamic differently? What would one step in a different direction look like and feel like, and what would happen?
Even just that deep sense of inquiry, I think
Yes.
is the first step. Even like inquiring about like your cultural heritage and being like, what was I modeled to me in my life? There are a lot of like gender roles in a lot of cultures. Like you were saying at the start, women feel like they're responsible for these things. So if I do that deep sense of inquiry about what my part is, what part of that is also shaped by how I was raised?
Absolutely. So much of it is going to come from external forces, whether it's familial or cultural. The beauty of doing that inquiry is whatever you learn and discover in that process is yours to own. And you get to take that growth with you into your next relationship, right? So I always say to people, you might as well do the work now, right? And obviously, that doesn't apply if it's an unsafe relationship, or absolutely there are times when you've just got to get out as quickly as you can. But separate from those kinds of examples, you can do the growth work in a relationship and discover that what you've learned is that you want to get out of the relationship. You get to take all that growth work you did with you.
I love that. Yeah. So if we are considering leaving a relationship, what are 3 questions to ask before deciding to end a relationship?
So, one question to ask is, are we equally invested in creating positive change in the relationship? So, if you're trying and trying to create the change you need to make the relationship sustainable and healthy for you, and you notice that your partner is not doing that inquiry with you, not showing up for that kind of self reflection, not willing to take those risks to try something new, not even maybe necessarily identifying something new and different that your partner wants to create with you, right? That they want to create with you. If that doesn't exist, that can be a recipe for getting stuck in that efforting state, right? Where the partner who wants change just keeps plugging and pushing and plugging and pushing and hitting up against some resistance or brick wall instead of finding like a teammate and trying to move towards a desired change. That's like a flag in my mind, right? If you're trying to create change and you're hitting up against resistance, then that to me would be an indicator that maybe continued effort isn't going to be very productive.
Right. Yeah. It's really anxiety inducing too. And you're like, hey, you keep bringing this thing up and the person keeps avoiding it. I had a partner that just kept saying, it's okay. Everything's going to be okay. And I was like, you just saying that doesn't actually do anything. It just
Right.
keep literally burying your head in the sand and just pushing a little bit more sand on your head.
Yeah, it might have been really invalidating because you were saying there's something here that's not okay for me.
Yeah.
And to be told, no, it's going to be okay, it actually really delegitimizes the concern and the experience that you were trying to bring forward.
Yeah. And I think he just said it. I was like, that's really what you say to yourself, isn't it? You just,
Yeah, exactly.
that's
Right.
what
It's
gets you
very
through.
soothing. Yeah. Right.
Mm.
Right.
And I was
So, we
thinking,
talked in the beginning.
I was like, where did
No,
that
you
come
go.
from? Where did that come
Yeah.
from?
Yeah. Well, we talked in the beginning about the anxiety and the grief that can come up, the fear around conflict, the fear around relationships ending. And so it sounds like he was doing some self soothing, but that because he was having to self soothe, he wasn't able to show up there with you.
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting, really inquiring about my own experience. I was like, why am I wanting to either end this or move forward? And the answer was because I'm feeling really anxious. I'm not normally an anxious person. And so there was so much anxiety for me because I was like, I just don't know what's going on. If you just explain to me, like, what the hell is going on, it would be
Yeah.
much easier for me to just calm down and function. But I'm in this heightened state because there's no communication and I don't work like that. I need there to be communication. Hey there, it's Tali here. I have a quick favor to ask you. If you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, I'd love your help in sharing it. Is there someone you could share this episode with who might benefit from this conversation? Your support in spreading the word means we can connect with more amazing listeners like you, and it really means a lot to us. Thank you in advance for your help. Every share really makes a difference, and you never know how it might impact someone's life. Okay, back to the episode.
Your ability to just own that for yourself brings up multiple other important points, like the importance of just trusting your intuition and not judging yourself, right? We're going to keep circling back to the theme of shame where we started. You're able to validate that for yourself without any shame, right? You say, that's who I am. That's who I am. This is important to me. I don't function well without communication, and it dysregulated my system to not have it. There's no shame in that sentence, the way you said it, right? You didn't put pressure on yourself to change that about yourself. In fact, the uncomfortable change would have been if you had said something to yourself, but he's such a nice guy and he's been through so much, and I should really try to make this work. And maybe I'd be okay with less communication. Or maybe if I just explain it to him in a certain way, I can get him to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Those would have been like enmeshy type responses inside of yourself, but you stayed in that very self reflective and self accepting state. And then the other thing I love about what you just said is you turned to your body for a cue. We can get really stuck in our minds and look for the cognitive intellectual answer to relationship questions when really our heart is trying to tell us something or our body is trying to tell us something, right? And so you said, what's going on here? Something doesn't feel right. That's your mind. And then you turned to your body and you said, I'm feeling anxious. And you trusted that as information like gold when it comes to trying to discern whether a relationship is a good fit for you and worth continuing to try to work through or not?
Well, one of the things I talk about on this podcast a lot, but I actually haven't ever really gone into detail with it, is to follow your inner compass. And lately, it was interesting. Actually, I was talking to my bestie last night and we were talking about values. And she said, "What are your values?" And I said what they were straight away. And she goes, "How did you come to that?" And I said, "You know what? They just bubbled up as being true for me. And my three guiding stars are clarity. I'm really big on clarity. I genuinely think clear is kind and unclear is
Yes.
unkind. So
Mhm.
that's why for me, if someone's unclear, I genuinely think it's unkind. And I don't think that they're doing it on purpose all the time, but I never want to be that person. I always want to be as clear as possible. The second one is efficiency. And the third one is kindness. So the other one with clear is kind in a kind way. So that I've fell into the trap of being clear but unkind before, and
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
intentionally, because it's very easy when
Mhm.
you just blurt out the truth, right? So
Mhm.
I had to learn that skill to be kind about it.
Uh-huh.
But an efficiency. So for me, when those conversations go on in my head, I do trust myself. I do trust my inner compass because I think, why would I trust anybody more than I trust myself?
But I wish we could bottle that up and get and hand that out because that's just not the way most people feel, or many people anyway. It's not the way many people feel, and particularly people who've been conditioned as women. Yeah, the gender role of that goes along with being a girl or being a woman, identifying as a girl or a woman does not come with that little special potion that you just described.
Obviously, there's going to be people that know things more than me, like doctors. I'm not a doctor, so I'm going to trust a doctor. But this is when I talk about my panel of advisors. So it's like I have the inner compass, which is my inner counsel. And then I have my panel of advisors, which are very trusted people in my world. One of them is my mother, one of them's my best friend. And these are people that I value their opinion very highly and I will deeply consider what they're saying. It doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily do what they're saying, but it means I
Mhm.
would deeply consider it and I will want to hear the truth from them. And there's other
Yeah.
people that are also my panel advisors, and that might be doctors if I'm needing some advice. So even though I trust my inner compass, of course I'm going to seek counsel for things that I'm not
Mhm.
an expert in. It just makes sense, right? The other thing as well is I'm not willing to entertain something that I know is not going to be a good fit. Whereas I think that's a maturity thing because when I was younger, I did. I was talking to my therapist a while ago and we were talking about connections. And she said something like, "Why do you like these men? Do you like them because they like you? Or do you
Mhm.
actually like them?" And I
Mhm.
was like, huh, that's a
Yeah.
really
Oh,
interesting
yeah, sure.
question.
Yeah.
So I went back and I thought about it and I was like, wow, like you really have to sit down and have that sense of inquiry. Like, what is actually going on for me? Or am I just going with the flow?
And it gets complicated, which is the beauty of it. Like in that inquiry, you might discover I do like the feeling of being liked, appreciated, loved. I like who I am in the reflection of this person's eyes. I like what this person brings out in me. I like how I feel about myself when I'm with them. None of that's bad, by the way. None of that's bad, right? But having the awareness of it empowers you to be like more in a place of choice around being in healthy relationships or not. Because that, for example, is a really different version of it feels good to be liked. Everything I just said, right, is a different version of it feels good to be liked than it would be if what you discovered in your inquiry was something like, I get really anxious if I don't feel approved of. And so it's soothing to me to feel this person's approval, or I feel desperately afraid of being alone and lonely. And so having this connection soothes my anxiety, or my sense of worth goes down if I don't feel like I'm pleasing to this other person. Those would be, we might think of as more problematic versions of it feeling good to be liked. There's some growth edges in there that could be explored, right? But so the deeper your self knowledge goes, the more empowered you are to follow what feel like healthy instincts.
Gosh, I love that growth edges. What a great word. what a great what a great kind of concept. So we actually only answered one. What are the three questions? We did one question. There's
Oh,
two more to go.
yeah, yeah. So the second, we've been talking about all of them, is the beauty of it. But the second question is, have you challenged yourself to break your part of the pattern? right? And so that is something we talked about already. That would be the second question. If I usually withdraw, what happens if I get brave and say what's really on my mind? If I'm usually volatile and reactive, what happens if I practice staying calm and like really regulate myself before going into this conversation? Or another way to think about this second point about have I really looked at myself would be, am I bringing the change I want to experience to the relationship, right? If I'm craving more affection, what happens if I just lean in and provide more affection and actually go do the thing I'm wanting to get, give the thing I'm wanting to get, right? If I'm wanting more romance, what if I treat my partner more romantically? If I'm wanting more playfulness, if I'm wanting more space, whatever it is, what happens if I take more responsibility for that
Mhm.
and bring that to the relationship? Do I then get more of that feeling that I'm needing for myself from the relationship?
Mm.
The answer may be yes, and the answer may be no, but it's worth a try, right? Before making a big decision to end a significant partnership.
That's so interesting that you say that. Really brought something up for me years ago, like maybe 17 years ago. I was in a relationship and there was a lot of fighting happening and I didn't like it. And I can't even remember what we were fighting about. But at the time, I went to a counselor and she said, I want you to try something this weekend. No matter what happens, I just don't want you to get angry at your partner. Just try it
Mm,
on. Just try it on. And I was like, all
mhm.
right. No one's ever suggested that before. I'll try it on. And oh my gosh, like just no matter what happened, and I felt it come up, but I just didn't express it. And then I
Mm,
noticed it. It was like the trigger to notice. And I was like, wow, when I'm not reacting, it's much more peaceful. And then I had to unpack the story. I was like, well, first of all, is this healthy to do this? Are you suppressing
great
something?
question. Right. Mhm.
Or is your anger really just not necessary?
Right. Is there a pattern to volatility and I actually just need to do a little regulation work? Or is this a really important point that needs to be made? Otherwise, I'm betraying myself. But sometimes we don't know the answer to that question until we do exactly what your therapist suggested, which is try on the opposite and see what it feels like. What do we learn from that? If we do that in the spirit of self inquiry, we're going to learn something.
Yeah, it was really helpful because what it taught me was that you can try on anything and you may not like it, but you won't know unless you try it on.
Right. I was thinking something similar a few minutes ago when you said having the maturity now to know more what you like, whereas you didn't when you were younger. And I was thinking, well, but isn't that kind of age appropriate? Like we learn who we are by trying things on. And so when you were younger, that's a form of self inquiry. You were trying different things on to see what fit and what felt right. Sure, we could call that a version of immaturity, but I think it's an age appropriate self discovery process. And what you just described doing at the urging of your therapist is at that age, an age appropriate trying on of something to see if it was a fit, to see what you could learn from it, right? Our early relationships, like when we're teenagers and young adults, we're in it to see what we can learn from it and who are we and what feels important and what's a fit and not a fit and how do I want to handle myself, and so all kinds of experimentation makes sense. But you're a therapist's dream. Your therapist could give you that assignment and you did it with accountability to yourself, right, and with curiosity. And so kudos to you for being able to do that. That's a mark of maturity. Other people might take that prompt and then just feel angry that now I can't even be angry without making my therapist uncomfortable, right? Or now I have to suppress this even more and I'm going to get even more explosive. But you were able to do it you were taking a flashlight and looking around inside of yourself and being really curious about what was coming up next. Keep that with you. That's going to benefit you in your life and your growth and in every relationship you choose to be in.
Thank you. I feel like I did have a leg up because my mum is a therapist or was a therapist before she
I hope
retired.
my kids feel that way.
It's funny actually because my sisters sometimes when my mum goes into therapy mode, they like hate it. And I'm like, I love it. I'm like, bring it. But it's interesting because like as someone's mother's being a therapist, do you want that in that moment or do I just want you to be my mum?
Absolutely.
All right. So we have one more question.
Yeah. So the third question to ask would be, how long have I been trying to break this problematic cycle? And then I cheated on this one and I add a follow up question. I still call it part of the same question, which is if I've tried and tried and the cycle can't be broken, would I choose to stay? Right? Is this a non negotiable pattern and experience? Because if I can say, you know what, relationships are complicated and none of them are perfect. And even if the relationship can't change in this way that I'm wishing that it could, I choose it, right? If I'd still choose it, then the task shifts and it's time to practice not trying to change it as much, giving it a little space to breathe, focusing on the reasons why you're choosing to stay and the things you do have gratitude for. On the other hand, if you notice I've been trying and trying to create the change, it's time for a little reality test here. I've done what I can, and my partner has done what they can. And we're being shown by our life experience that this isn't going to work. Then maybe it's time for some of what you're calling clarity and kindness and efficiency to let it end and
Yeah.
end in a compassionate way.
Mm. I think what also comes up for me, and again, this is so much easier said than done, but we literally have one life in this form, and this with this mind, with this body, with this experience. Do we really want to spend it in turmoil, in somewhere where we feel like we can't be ourselves? We're also hindering someone else's experience potentially.
Yeah. And that's you in this differentiated state again where you can see you're seeing your own experience and your partner's experience at the same time and allowing that those are different, right? And that you're noticing that you need something different and that might be painful for your partner. You're hindering them having something that's a better fit for them. That's the kind of compassionate vision for the other that we can have when we're staying in that space of really following our own inner compass and trusting it and believing in it and acting on it. That's that differentiated state.
I recently saw this really moving clip on Instagram. My friend sent it to me. Long story short, it was about this woman who fell in love with this man. She was 45 at the time. He was 29. And she said they had the most beautiful, connected, loving relationship for 5 years. And then he mentioned that he wanted to have kids. She said that this shock just washed over her because I'm done having kids. That part of my life is gone. And she realized in that moment that they couldn't be together. And I
Mhm.
never want to take that from him, but I can't give that to him. And anyway,
Yeah.
long story short, she found somebody and she matched them together, and then she removed herself from the equation and they got together and had a baby. And it was really interesting to read the comments because to me, I was like, wow, that's like the pinnacle of love. It's so incredibly painful for you to do that because obviously you want this person for yourself, but you don't want to take that dream away from them. Yeah. And it was just interesting seeing the polarizing comments, but I just thought that really stuck with me. That experience of it's not always about us fully.
And I would say it would be similarly compassionate and beautiful to even a less extreme version where if she were to say, I honor that you want kids, and that's a dream for you that I can honor as important. And I also can be really clear and honest in saying that's not what I want. And so if that means you need something different, I support that, right? Despite the pain for me. That's the seeing two realities as equally valid at the same time and not being afraid of the pain.
It's such an instinct to avoid the pain, isn't it?
Yes, our own and the other person's.
Yeah. Actually, it's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm reading a book at the moment called The Comfort Crisis. I forget the name he uses, but there's a name for basically going out and putting yourself in these extremely uncomfortable conditions where they're like out in the wilderness and they're like barely eating and barely sleeping and they're freezing if they are. He was just talking about how we're so used to the opposite of that in today's world of everything should be great, everything should be comfortable, I should feel great all the time.
Right. It's like a subtle layer of what gets called toxic positivity, right? That everything's supposed to be smooth and happy. And what's wrong with me if it's not? And what did I do wrong? Yeah.
Interesting that someone has to be wrong, right? Oh, someone's got to be
Yes.
wrong.
Someone's got to be wrong. Right. If I'm experiencing this bad thing that's not supposed to happen, this uncomfortable feeling, then something went wrong. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Dr. Jurgen, this has just been incredible. I just want to end with one last question. For anyone going through a painful breakup, what advice would you give them to help them reopen their heart? So I'm assuming
Mm.
in this scenario that they're on the journey to healing.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is immediate expansion on what we just said about not being afraid of the pain, to let yourself feel all of the feelings that are there.
Mhm.
Because if we resist those, they're going to persist, right? So if you're feeling a lot of grief about it, don't try to push yourself through to go out and have a good time because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to get back up on the horse. If we're resisting the real grief, it's going to persist. So trust yourself to feel all the feelings, let the feelings flow. Trust yourself that there's going to be movement and momentum and growth in your life as a result of feeling those feelings, as opposed to them being like a big deep hole that you're going to get stuck in. Those feelings lead to somewhere. They're like a river that leads to somewhere. They're not a well that you're going to get stuck in. So you can let yourself feel the feelings. And then ultimately, I think the word that comes up for me is trust. Really opening your heart again takes trusting yourself and your own discernment about relationships and your ability to survive pain again, because there will be pain again. Even if you end up in the relationship that lasts for the rest of your life, there will be pain within it. So trusting your ability to tolerate the pain, trusting others if they've earned it, right? Trusting them enough to let them back in. But ultimately it's about being willing to take the risk, because getting back in relationship, reopening your heart, that's not something to wait for safety to do. Intimacy by nature is not an emotionally safe and predictable experience. It's a risky experience. So I would say the key is to remember that it's a risk, and it's about waiting until it feels in your heart like it's a risk worth taking.
I'm just going to end with this quote that I sent to a friend of mine that kind of it sums up what you're saying from Simon Sinek. It says, the best definition of love I've ever heard: love is giving someone the power to destroy you and trusting that they won't use it.
That's good.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. This has been
Oh, it's been so
incredible.
fun.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I love it. Thank you so much for being here. If people want to get in touch with you, if they'd love to have a session with you, find out more, how can they do that?
Great question. So I would say check out my Instagram page as one way to follow me. And you can find me, you can DM me from there. So that's at Dr. Lindsay Jernigan. So dr. dot. And then my website is www.drlindsayjernigan.com.
And we'll link everything in the show notes, of course. Dr. Jernigan, thank you so much again. This has
Oh,
been amazing. I
so
really
much my
appreciate it.
pleasure. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
thank you. This podcast is a Rebel Love production. To find the links mentioned in this episode, go to rebellove.com/let love begin. It just,
Yay.
it just was so like, I think I asked you like 2 questions from the sheet.
Yeah.
It was just so like flowy and natural, and yeah, and you've just got so much great. I just love the way you think.
Oh, thank you.